So welcome to the folks in the room and to those that joined us on GoToMeeting. As a welcome, I am Erin Zwerko. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Yarmouth. And joining us tonight are members of the Affordable Housing Committee. So to my right is Megan Casey, the chair of our committee. I have Jay Waterman to my left, who is also a member, and Cecilia Gushia, who is another member of our committee. We are doing something a little bit different here, which is a small group listening session. So if folks are interested, you're welcome to join us around the table for the conversation. And I will note that we will be recording this session, but it is not broadcast live. We're going to record it so that we can share it through the town's website and other media in the future. So with that, welcome to the Affordable Housing Committee's listening session on the inclusionary zoning proposal. We're very excited to see everyone tonight, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your evening to join us here at the Log Cabin. I will ask folks to remember to try and speak into the microphone because that facilitates the folks online being able to hear everyone very clearly. And as Sean had mentioned to a few of you, please feel free to grab that wireless mic. Don't touch any of the buttons and speak into it. If we can't hear you, we'll give you a heads up. Again, thanks for joining us. If everyone that are around the circle wanted to introduce yourselves, that would be great, and then we'll get started. Go ahead.
Yeah. Erin already said, but my name is Megan Casey, and I'm the chair of the Yarmouth Affordable Housing Committee.
Do you just want me to say my name?
Yeah, sure.
Carrie Martin.
Barbara White.
Ron Zavisky.
Marilyn Bronzy.
Mary Lou Michael.
Marge Titcomb.
Chip Ahrens.
Joy Ahrens.
Chris Slater. Coming to you, Deborah.
Deborah Keefe. Cecilia Guesha.
Jay Waterman. I'm a member of the committee.
And we have a few folks joining us online. If you wanted to, so we are the listening session member online, but I can call on folks that are online with us, and if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great. So I see Margaret, well, I guess I can, your names are there. So I see Margaret Downing has joined us, Peter Titcomb. It looks like Councillor David Craig, Catherine Latham, and some folks that are with initials, and Julie Dubofsky, our Town of Yarmouth assistant planner, who will be taking some notes as well for us tonight, as including folks here in the log cabin will be taking some notes. Thanks, Ed. I thought that might be you. So Ed Ashley is also online. We'll get right to it. So the point of this listening session is to give you some information about the inclusionary zoning ordinance, but then we have a series of moderated questions, and we're looking to hear from members of the community that have some interest in particular, the committee's inclusionary zoning ordinance. So for reference, there are on the end of the table a couple copies of the inclusionary zoning proposal that came from the committee. It is also online for those that are joining us from home if you browse to yarmouth.me.us/affordable housing. It's linked up at the top of that page. The Affordable Housing Committee has been working on this proposal for the better part of a year following the issuance of a recommendation report to the Town Council in January. The Town Council report included a series of recommendations on management and financial recommendations and zoning recommendations. And so the inclusionary zoning proposal was the first item that was advanced out of it. We had a couple of consultations with the Town Council this fall, and then ultimately the Affordable Housing Committee had submitted their proposal to the Planning Board in December, where we had a hearing with the Planning Board. As changed the zoning ordinance, the Planning Board must issue a recommendation to the Town Council prior to the Town Council considering issuing or adopting the amendments. So for one of the first questions we had for the group is whether or not you are familiar with the Affordable Housing Committee's 2022 report to the Town Council. And if not, we can provide a little bit more explanation.
So are most people familiar with the basics of the proposed inclusionary zoning ordinance? Okay, would anybody like the basics explained? It's just, okay.
So there, in the report, there were three sections on zoning management and financial recommendations. Zoning included references about inclusionary zoning, changing amendments to accessory dwelling units, which are currently allowed in some areas of Yarmouth, looking towards doing an affordable housing overlay district, and going as far as reducing the minimum lot size. As it relates to management, the recommendations included a series of topics on how to create affordable housing in the community, such as through a housing nonprofit, through the town's ordinances, or through the through other quasi-public organizations, such as the Economic Development Advisory Boards, Local Development Corporation. And then finally, there were a number of financial recommendations issued that spanned topics such as including a line item in the town's budget to fund affordable housing, searching out grant opportunities, but also leveraging a little bit of funding that is in the that is available for affordable housing to leverage it for federal, state, and county resources. So that was sort of the basis of the recommendation report. And we'd love to hear, although we did pursue the inclusionary zoning proposal first, we'd love to hear some feedback on the overall recommendations, if you have any.
And don't be shy. Just speak up if you'd like to. It looks like she. Yeah.
I certainly don't have the knowledge to be able to answer the question.
Sure.
And I think there are probably more than just me that didn't want to take other people's time who are fully familiar with it. You made mention about reducing the density in a certain overlay district. Could you talk about that, please? I know that's been around for a while, but I didn't realize it had gotten to a point where there was an overlay district that's been listed and that a recommendation has been made with regard to that.
Could you pass the mic down there? I think she had a question after you.
So there is no proposal for an overlay district. It was a recommendation in our report. However, there is state law that has recently been adopted last year that does require cities and towns to create zoning districts for affordable housing developments. But that is to come. That's not something that the Affordable Housing Committee is pursuing right now. But the recommendation was to look to develop an overlay district where it was incentive-based for primarily affordable housing developments, which is consistent with what the state law is requiring now. The other recommendation was to reduce minimum lot sizes in certain areas. So it's two separate recommendations, but could be combined because these proposals that the Affordable Housing Committee has advanced work well when there are incentives. And incentives could include increased density in certain areas where it's appropriate.
So is that part of the recommended ordinance?
Not today.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
I'll clarify a bit, which is that what Aaron first described was the recommendations that our whole committee made to the town council, and there was a number of items there. As Aaron mentioned, funding items, the overlay was an idea, talking about lot size, and the one that's moved forward first, the one that seemed to have the most interest was the inclusionary zoning one. So that is moving. It hasn't gone anywhere yet, but it's moving. I mean, it hasn't been approved yet, is what I mean, but it's moving. But the others are also being worked on. They're just not as far advanced as the inclusionary zoning one by our committee or by the town.
And it's also important to note that the inclusionary zoning ordinance doesn't need major changes or any changes to the zoning ordinance right now. We do feel as though there are lots of changes that need to be made to the zoning ordinance, but inclusionary zoning can work within our existing zoning right now. It's not ideal, but it can work within the existing zoning. So just wanted to mention that. Yeah, I think in order for folks in the back to speak, if you want to speak, the mic at the podium, or you can pass the wireless mic. So, yeah, sorry. We could get the wireless mic to you. Sorry to make you hoof it over there.
My question is, I think maybe before the process that you're talking about, or maybe it's coming, but has there been any questioning of the community about the willingness or the interest in having the inclusionary zoning?
That's why you're here tonight. So we've wanted to have a number of listening sessions. We've had one already. This is our second one. We've had public meetings at the planning board. So there's an opportunity. There have been, I guess, at least 3 opportunities for the public to look at what we've drafted and make comment on the inclusionary zoning ordinance. There may be more. There are more planning board meetings coming up.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Joanne Babcock, Blueberry Cove. I have a number of mental questions here. If you built 100 units, you'd only have affordable housing for 10 people. Is there an inventory of how many people who would like to live in Yarmouth? The other thing is I see no mention of tiny homes. I think it's time to think outside the box because as you delineate the needs, I don't see this proposal solving very much of it at all, if any.
So we have done a little bit of research in terms of the need within the community, and that relates to folks that are within certain income brackets. So the charge of the committee is to look at households that are earning less than 80% of the area median income.
I thought it said 120 here.
It is for the inclusionary zoning proposal. For rental, it's 80%, and for homeownership, it's 120.
Okay, so that still means a town employee really couldn't live in one of these. Their income wouldn't be enough unless they have a spouse that works.
It's that is the maximum that those households could earn. So either 80% in a rental unit or 120% in a homeownership unit. So
They can make less than that.
yeah. So
Would their rent adjust accordingly?
yes.
Okay, I thought I saw there was a 99-year restriction on it must remain as an affordable housing unit.
That's correct. That is part of the ordinance.
Would they resell to the town or on the open market?
So as part of the ordinance, there would need to be management that would happen through the town or through a third party to make sure that those units, when they do resell or are rented, continue to rent or sell at that affordable price, which is set by the ordinance.
Okay. I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, Cumberland built a whole bunch of affordable housing. Do they have employees living in those units?
I'm not sure.
Can we find out?
We certainly could.
And I want to thank Councillor Casey for posting on the Yarmouth Community Network.
About
I
this
very
meeting?
much appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. Yeah, we'd want to get the word out. We want people to tell us what they think.
Well, we need to know what's going on. We sure don't get it out of the forecaster now.
I know they've stopped covering our meetings, so
Everybody's
it's hard.
sad. It's sad.
Well, just if I could just mention just about the need. I was recently reading Avesta Housing's newsletter. They're the largest affordable housing developer in the state, nonprofit affordable housing developer in the state. And they said that in 2022, they had about 8,700 requests for housing. And this is in the greater Portland area. This is, southern Maine, essentially. They had about 8,700 requests for housing just in the year of 2022 alone. And they produced 120 new units of housing in 2022.
So the need's going to get greater.
So that gives you a sense of the scale of the folks that we're not able to help. And I think that we shouldn't focus on what's happening right here in Yarmouth, because I think we need to look at southern Maine, greater Portland. It's all kind of the same market.
I think we need to fix our own problems first. I really do.
I'm saying that we don't necessarily have data on the actual need of people in Yarmouth per se, because they may say there's nothing here.
Well, they don't live here. If you were to, poll the town's employees, which you mentioned as one of the biggest, would they want to live here in those units? That would be my first question for the need.
The other thing that I'll mention is that we do have some information that moderate income households in Yarmouth have dropped 22%.
It's because of the property taxes.
And housing prices.
No, I'm serious. I know people who moved because of the property taxes.
Since 1999,
Oh, yeah.
number of moderate income households has dropped 22%. And I think part of what we're trying to do here is keep the economic diversity of the town and not lose low and moderate income folks who say, well, Yarmouth doesn't have anything. I'm going to go down and ask Avesta for housing in Portland.
Okay,
for
I hope you
example.
consider it's not just the housing, it's the ancillary costs. Will you take those into consideration?
Yeah, so when, for example, when there's a homeowner, so in the administration of the inclusionary zoning ordinance, should it be adopted by the town, which is a long process, and we're only at the very start of it. There are, when you calculate the for sale cost, things such as your taxes, your homeowner's insurance, the interest you might pay on your mortgage, are all part of the calculation to ensure that those ancillary costs, those housing costs that are not just the cost of your mortgage or your rent, are incorporated into that calculation. So it's always taking into account those factors. which in a community like Yarmouth with a higher tax rate than maybe some of the others, that is something that needs to be considered when you calculate those sale or rental prices. Of course, taxes don't necessarily apply with a rental price, but utility costs, homeowners association fees, things like that. Yeah.
I also will add, you asked about, you said that correctly, that inclusionary zoning would not produce a huge amount of housing right off the bat.
10 units at most.
Right. Well, yeah, but it is an important, it's not at all the be-all and end-all of the solution, but it is an important component of the solution so that development doesn't continue on without any affordable housing being included, especially with the advent or the introduction and the I'm missing the word, but the state law that recently passed. There's going to be some changes from that, and we want to have inclusionary zoning as a part of our ordinances when that is.
Have you
is
inventoried
implemented.
the land available? Because I notice a lot of wildlife has been severely impacted and dislocated, and that should be part of your calculations.
Yep. So we continue to look at various properties that are available in Yarmouth, and the potential build out of those properties to determine how many units potentially could be built under current zoning or under potentially future zoning. So yes, that does play an important piece of it. The inclusionary zoning ordinance is not the only tool, which is why I had started with some of the recommendations from our report or the committee's report back a year ago, is that it was the one that was decided to be advanced initially, but there needs to be a multi-pronged effort to ensure that we do create affordable housing opportunities in the community. Zoning is one item. Looking at financial changes, whether it's through the town or through other avenues, and also management, so who's actually creating the affordable housing. It doesn't necessarily need to just be private developers. It needs to be everyone working together in concert. So.
Would these be available only to teachers, police officers, town employees? I mean, that's the first thing you say. That's what you need. Now, if they don't get any of this housing, it's sort of a false presentation.
No, so it's eligible household and it's based on your income. So it's not necessarily that you have to be...
Anybody applying, or
Correct.
do you just take applications from town employees first?
It is anyone who meets the income.
So they wouldn't necessarily be...
They don't necessarily...
They would necessarily be the people you're talking about here.
They may not necessarily be.
They probably won't be.
But it's, I mean, the town's motto would suggest that Yarmouth is a welcoming community, so we need to be...
You can't have it both ways here. You can't.
Well, I was...
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think you need to start thinking outside the box to solve the problem for our Yarmouth people.
So I went through a lot of pieces very quickly about the inclusionary zoning ordinance, and I recognize that everyone here is probably not familiar with what is in the inclusionary zoning ordinance. So are there other questions about the format or the scope of it that I can answer to continue the conversation? And it would be great if folks could join us up in the circle because that was really the intent of the setup here. Yeah.
My name is Sandra Wenlin. I am not a local resident in Yarmouth. I'm a local real estate broker, and I have a lot of experience with inclusionary zoning. And I'm here just because I have seen the pitfalls of inclusionary zoning. One of the things I really want to bring to your attention is when we look at who qualifies for this housing, we can use Portland as an example. A 4-bedroom home will sell for $425,000. A family of 4 has to reside in it because if it's a 4-bedroom, you have to have the same number of occupants in that home. Their maximum income for a family of 4 can be $134,000 a year. To qualify for that loan, most of the folks who need the affordable housing haven't had the time to build up cash reserves. They're struggling. They come in, they're interested in buying an affordable home, they're excited about it, they go to a lender, and all of a sudden, they're denied, because even if they're looking at 97% financing, when you take that, what their mortgage is going to be, add in the taxes, add in the utilities, when you start factoring all these little numbers into it, they actually have to make about $145,000 a year to even qualify for the loan with today's loan requirements. And that's at an interest rate at 6%. So even with an interest rate at 7% this year, I've seen many people want to buy affordable housing and they cannot qualify for the loans. I've never seen a police officer. I've never seen a local town employee. My son's a firefighter. He wouldn't qualify. So it's interesting for me to listen to public comment, because those are not the people that we're seeing. And the people that I see typically aren't from the town that has the inclusionary zoning. They're coming from surrounding towns to get into those towns. So I hope that you can take this information, take a step back, and look at who are you really trying to serve in your community.
Thank you.
I would say I think the committee has looked quite a bit at who we are, who should be welcomed in this community, and I think we've talked about that quite a bit. The comprehensive plan from 2010, which kicked off last night to be updated. We'll look at population changes, but I think in general there is interest from the community to ensure that this committee or the community is open to all sorts of folks, regardless of what their ties are to the community, while also acknowledging that we have to support the folks that do live here. And I'm wondering if the committee members have a response to that as well.
Well, I think that we do need to keep our metrics sort of uniform, because we're dealing with things like 80% of area median income, which is determined by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or 120% of area median income. So I think we're not looking to decide where somebody's from or what type of job they have. We're just looking at their income. And that's what affordable housing does across the country in any federal, state, county, local program. It's called fair housing discrimination if you're targeting a particular person or to try to get them into the housing. You have to just go on the generic area median income. So that's what we're trying to focus on in this, and not say whether somebody's from Yarmouth, how many years they've lived in Yarmouth, how many kids they've had in Yarmouth. We're just trying to produce affordable housing when market rate developers come to town and build housing.
Okay.
Did we have?
That's okay.
Yeah. Why don't we go over here, and then we'll come right back to you.
I guess I just wanted to piggyback on sort of the numbers idea. I think there have been a lot of public comments already asking for a feasibility study, or like the metrics or whatever sort of behind the proposal. I don't know if you can, so we don't get into a situation where we can't sell or rent one of the units. Can you show us examples of how it's going to work? And I know that Aaron, you just mentioned sort of the other ideas, and I know Deborah Keefe mentioned that there's a comprehensive strategy behind the Affordable Housing Committee, and there's tax incentives, zoning changes, other things that you mentioned, the ADUs, which I think we all can agree that we need affordable housing in this town. I think land banks were mentioned, subsidies, and I guess I'm just wanting to see this comprehensive strategy and also see sort of the feasibility of inclusionary zoning.
Well, I can just mention that the comprehensive strategy is actually the recommendations that we made to the town council in the January 2022 report that's on the town's website. So Aaron mentioned the sort of those broad stroke goals, recommendations that we have. We are sort of zeroing in on inclusionary zoning as a first tool. But if you want to look at the broader ideas that, and we dig into them pretty well, I think, in that report, it's on the town's website.
And I can send it to you.
And does that include land banks and like a management authority and the cost to the town, sort of a?
We do talk in that about the organizational structures for long-term enforcement of affordability. There's not a one-size-fits-all to that, whether it's a land bank or some other sort of nonprofit, or town staff does it temporarily while we just have a few units coming through. So there are some ideas in there, but we don't have the solution to that yet. I really do want to acknowledge that getting to the numbers and showing some actual homeownership prices or costs or income limits and that kind of thing, I think we can get to that in the short term. So I think we are going to work on that. So I appreciate the comment.
Hi, I'm Julia Libby. My first question is regarding the, I don't have the word, for all the units to look the same, which I can envision for apartments, but let's say for single family homes, how far is that taken? Is that square footage has to be the same? Exterior and interior is like every house on the lot exactly the same, but one of them's just less expensive. Yeah, if anybody could speak to that.
So I think the committee acknowledges that we need to take a closer look at, through the review process with the planning board, on how land development happens and how some of the standards in the ordinance apply to land development and subdivisions. But generally, as it relates to the similar features, it is easier to apply in a rental building, like you had mentioned, but we'll need to think through how we apply that to either a subdivision that is all of the units are constructed by a singular entity, or in the case where there's land development where the lots are sold to third parties or end users to build their own home on that property. So there is some, we do acknowledge that we need to work on that and how that applies to all of the standards in the ordinance. There still needs some work on it.
Okay, yeah, because that was another question I wasn't planning on asking, but I had thought of today was, if it is just the land, you're selling the land at an affordable price? Does that even apply if you're getting loans for that? Or do you have to have a construction package built into it, like a build package? But I don't know the answers. So,
Or
okay.
do we
So
right
you're looking
now?
into it. That's
So
fine.
we are working on it.
So my next question was how you chose 120% for the home ownership, if that was based on Maine housing and the financing that's available, or if it was based on other things.
So the state in the adoption of new law has set home ownership affordability at 120% and rental affordability at 80%. So the choice was for consistency across definitions and across programs.
With LD is what you're doing.
Exactly.
Okay. So I was on Maine Housing's website earlier, and for that 120%, the max house was $404,000. So if that, like, let's say, and you're doing a little subdivision, that's the max that you can get to eat the least amount of money as the developer. You're going to max out 404, boom, here we go. That then eliminates 119% and down. It only targets that 120% income. So it's really like in a home ownership situation, that's not providing it for many people. Is that, I don't know if that's the proper math and the proper way to get there, but it.
So in other words, they have to make enough to afford that house that you're selling at $404,000.
Right.
But they can't make too much.
You're not
and so they're
eligible.
They're squeezed right in there.
To the
and so the
120.
idea, I suppose, if I were a developer of that home ownership subdivision, I would really try to target a home at say 350.
At your own cost, though, you wouldn't do that.
No, at your cost of 350, and then they could potentially go anywhere from 350 up to the 404. You're right. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
It's a sort of narrow band of being able to afford the home and not being over income. If you grab the mic or. Just because we have
So
people.
Maine Housing has a maximum sales price of $404,950. That's to qualify for Maine Housing financing, and it doesn't relate to the 120% AMI. So the town can have a different price. Their town could be at 120% or 20% for AMI right now in Portland. The max sales price is $425,000, but then those buyers don't qualify to purchase with the Maine Housing loan. That's just Portland.
Okay, because I think that the Maine Housing uses the greater metro area, which is what
We're in the greater
to.
Portland
Yeah, yeah.
metro
So-
area
yes.
in all the statistical area median income and that kind of stuff. Yep.
Okay.
So, Julia, I want to be recognize that there's a number of people online as well. So, want to be able to give them a chance too.
Okay, I guess one thing you don't need to answer now, but that, again, with numbers would be a pro forma, the build costs to actually do that. And then the last thing is that comment that zoning doesn't build houses. It only can prevent things from being built, and so to layer another thing of restrictions on top of it just seems a little bit backwards. Thank you.
Thanks.
So folks that have joined us on the GoToMeeting, everyone in the room, you can see them on the screen. If you wanted to unmute yourself and chime in with any questions or comments on the inclusionary zoning proposal, we're here to listen and respond as appropriate. Not yet? All right. Well, we're here. I'm keeping my eye on the GoToMeeting, so if you wanted to chime in, just turn on your camera and your microphone. Catherine Latham, do you have a question or comment tonight?
Oh.
Nope, never mind.
Again.
Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot. I wanted to, we heard a lot about sort of the mechanics of the ordinance, and something that I had mentioned earlier is that these types of ordinances, inclusionary zoning ordinances, work well when there is incentives built into it. And that is generally development incentives. It could also be various permitting incentives. So the ordinance does include some things, including lower lot sizes, lot area per unit. It does also include, additional height benefits. I'm sure the community, the folks that are joining us tonight are aware that structures in Yarmouth are limited to 35 feet. But we have proposed the idea of allowing additional height for buildings that exceed the baseline requirement for affordable units. We also include incentives around off-street parking, so being able to reduce parking requirements. We would love to hear some feedback from the folks that have gathered here in the room and online on your thoughts about that, particularly related to the height, which is something that I think the planning board, as they go through their review, is keenly interested in. Not one way or the other, but want to hear more from the community relative to that. So, yeah, if you have some thoughts there. Oh, can we pass the microphone down that way? Oh, all the way over.
Just a very quick question.
Yeah.
Where is the zone? Can you describe where the zone is that we need to put our minds around whether we agree with 45 feet or
Yeah,
whatever?
sure. So it is, you all might be familiar, and this is maybe a long-winded answer, but it sets the stage for you. Yarmouth, a number of years ago, adopted a character-based code, which is the form-based code that applies to Route 1 and to Main Street. In the character-based code, it regulates the form of buildings more so than the location or the size. There are some restrictions, of course, setbacks still apply in that 35 feet. So the area where the increased height would be allowed is along Route 1, literally just along Route 1, and then in the core of the village. So essentially from just beyond Portland Street, from where we are in the log cabin, to about where the intersection of Elm Street and Main Street is. So those would be the two distinct areas where that increased height would be allowed.
I think you were asking, though, also, where would this entire inclusionary zoning ordinance be allowed? Is that what your question was? Yes. Yeah. So it's the whole town. It's any development of 5 or more homes that are for ownership and 10 or more homes that are for rent.
Okay, getting back to the height.
Yes.
I think I understood you to say it applies, generally speaking, along Route 1 and along Main Street.
For that specific incentive. And if I could ask you to hold the mic a little bit closer to you. Yeah, thank you.
So, and I don't know whether this is possible under the character-based zone. So a developer could theoretically decide, I want to take down one of the long-held views of the beauty of Main Street is the mix of businesses and houses. But you're suggesting that someone could come in, take down a house and put up a higher structure for inclusionary, for affordable housing instead of the house that's there now.
So it gets a little bit more complicated because we have local historic districts in the downtown along Main Street primarily. And in the case where a structure is deemed contributing to those historic districts, so it has certain elements that are contributing. The demolition of that building, whether it's a historic home or otherwise, is prohibited unless the planning board approves the future proposal through a public hearing process. As part of that public hearing process, the Historic Preservation Committee, which was newly formed last year, would be making a recommendation one way or the other. So it does not necessarily allow the straight up demolition of that structure unless there is this review process built in as well. Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong. So other than the incentives that we were talking about here, the developer comes in and does a market rate project and has inclusionary zoning units. They have to meet all the underlying zoning requirements. And there may be some incentives which change some things like parking or height potentially. But essentially what we're saying is they have to meet the underlying zoning wherever they are when they bring their proposal forward.
Yeah, Julia. I'll need you to go to the mic or grab this handheld right here.
on? Hello?
Yep.
It's on.
Is there a height restriction right now in the form-based and the
Yep.
character-based, and that's
35 feet. It's 35 feet throughout the entire town.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Oh, thanks, Megan. Ed, it looks like you've unmuted yourself. I know you're intimately aware of the HBC process and have offered quite a number of comments on this height allowance. So I'd love to hear your feedback. Ed?
Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you.
Oh.
Ed Ashley, 20 Spartina Point. I've already put in comments, as you know, Aaron, on the height issue, and the example that I used was when 298 Maine first was proposed. That's the old Rings hardware. And the first proposal was for 4 stories, which would require a change in our ordinances to permit that, because our ordinances say 35 feet in height or 3 stories. And I had some suggestions on that, but I haven't heard any response on it. And I don't know if that means that the committee has just dismissed them as not being apt. But to give you a brief and graphic example of what I'm thinking of is, given our concern for the character of Main Street and retention of of the values that we have, I'm in danger of lapsing into a different point here. Let me move past that. The suggestion I had was that whereas 298 Main Street sits bold on Main Street, and 4 stories would have been looming over all of the adjoining structures along Main Street. We don't have any 4-story buildings in Yarmouth. And it would have been at odds with the streetscape. But in contrast to that, the adjoining development that's currently in the works for approvals, Railroad Square, at the rear of the property, which is about 1,000 feet back from Main Street, there is a plan, there are a series of 3-story buildings planned, 3 of them. The one which faces Main Street, I could see that being 4 stories because it would be set back as a matter of perspective and not dominate the streetscape. It would, and somewhere, and I don't think you have to go back as far as 1,000 feet. There's some in-between number, and I don't know how to get to it, where going to 4 stories would be feasible in the sense of not being terribly at odds with the surrounding streetscape. Beyond that, and a slightly different point, the going to 4 stories seems to me would necessitate the installation of an elevator. I don't know how much that would add to the cost of the building. I wonder if the savings to the developer by adding a 4th story might be illusory. I just raised that question. And the underlying point that I would make and urge upon the committee, I've said it before, it's about money. It's about subsidization. These incentives, I don't see them doing the trick. We've had many of the incentives, things which are deemed to be incentives, in place in Yarmouth for many years. Some of the things which are mentioned in LD 2003, and they have not resulted in the construction of affordable housing. It just hasn't happened, even though we have these incentives there. Now you can say, well, maybe the formulas aren't right. Maybe we could enrich it a bit. But I still think that given the cost of construction, given the fact that no developer is going to want to enter into a project in order to lose money, They're in business to make money. We can talk about how much money in a particular case, but ultimately that's their business and it's their decision as to whether they move forward with a particular project. And it just seems to me that without subsidization of some form, it just isn't going to happen. And I would say that, first of all, I'd point out in passing that the least expensive housing is existing housing in all cases. So rehabilitations of existing buildings should be high on the list of targets for potential affordable housing. That won't get you there totally. The inclusionary zoning seems to put the burden of carrying the freight on the subsidization aspect, in the first instance, on the developer, but it's not going to stay there because, as I said, they're not in business to lose money. It will be borne by higher pricing for the other units in the development to make up for the loss on the affordable units or the less profit on the affordable units. And it seems to me that it's the middle that's getting squeezed out here. In your efforts to come up with affordable units, you're making the adjoining units more expensive. That's if government does not intervene with some sort of funding. And whether that takes the form of an assessment on the existing residents of Yarmouth to come up with a meaningful building fund available for assistance, grants in aid for certain types of affordable housing, or whether it's on a more statewide basis, or whether we get into government subsidization of Section 8 programs, which I'm not all that familiar with. I won't dwell on that. But in the end, it comes down, it seems to me, it has to come down to money, and where does that money come from, and who bears the burden. I would also point out that within the greater Portland area or within Cumberland County, Yarmouth is already one of the most densely populated towns. We're the smallest town geographically in the county. And if you look at the figures that Greater Portland Council of Governments has put out, you will see that we're about third in terms of density, as it is right now. I do not know, and I would like to know, what the mix is with our total population. How many people are living in rental units right now, as opposed to living in homeowner-owned structures? I think that would be an interesting statistic. I think we're doing more than may be recognized. Just looking at the population of the K-Mill properties. Now, I'm not saying that they're all affordable, but they certainly cover a different demographic than by and large, than the homeowner segment of the population. And that's just an observable fact, it seems to me. So I say it gets back to the money. In the first instance, though, the question I would like to hear about my idea on height, because I don't think we can have a blanket waiver for an increase in height as something that we would want to see in all parts of the town, no matter where. I think it's got to be a little bit more nuanced than that. We don't want to lose the things that we value in town in order to achieve this goal. There has to be a balanced approach to it. Otherwise, I don't see it being successful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Julie, it looks like you might have wanted to respond to a couple of the points.
Yes. So Ed, to your point regarding height, I was doing some research based on comments that you had given this year and then previously around 298. And so I'd be interested to hear, there are actually some buildings that, as you mentioned, are already very set back and that actually exceed 35 feet. Historic buildings such as 129 Main Street, that's part of the NYA, and that actually is already 4 stories in a sense. And then you have Sparhawk Mills, which is another one which also exceeds 35, but has another level, as well as interesting elements about roof pitch and whether that is inhabited space or not. So I think your creative view of space and form and setback is something that I heard before and have been exploring. And the statistics in terms of population and need also looked into in terms of people in the community who are using Section 8 vouchers, or also looked at vacancies in affordable housing developments. So that is something that the committee absolutely has considered. I think Jay illustrated it in his previous points too about the snapshot of the existing need, but then also the greater regional need. So we can pull up the, we've definitely done research before about the demographics in terms of rental and home ownership as well. So happy to share that at a later point if that's helpful.
So Ed also brings up an interesting point as it relates to the incentives in terms of basically financial incentives, and that is not something that the ordinance considers right now, but and hasn't necessarily been something that the town has pursued, but there is the opportunity to think of that as a way to help keep the development costs low while achieving affordable housing units. And it's not something that we've necessarily explored at this point, but would be interested to hear from you all if that's something that the committee should be exploring as a way to achieve the fact that we all need to, we being the town, private developers, for-profit developers, nonprofit developers, et cetera, to tackle the increasing need for different types of affordable units, affordable to folks that span the income levels. So we'd be curious to hear from people assembled today if that is something that we should be looking at.
Yep. Also, Ed, to one of your points, this is just one that we have done some research on most of those things, and I'm sorry if you haven't got, I mean, we haven't necessarily sent you the information, but we can. But inclusionary zoning is relatively new in Maine, but it has been done across the country for about 30 years in various places. And the data actually, it makes sense if you think about it, that an inclusionary zoning ordinance would increase the prices of the market rate homes in developments. But the research, the evidence shows that isn't the case. The housing prices do not go up in any significant way in areas where there is an inclusionary zoning ordinance. So maybe as Erin pointed out, that's because the incentives are different than what we are offering, and so that is definitely an area where we're gonna work more. But the evidence just doesn't bear that out. So it does bear out that although the numbers are small, it is true. This is not a 100-unit development going up, someplace in town which is all affordable. The numbers are small, but they're persistent, and they keep happening. And over time, a fairly good number of houses or rental units are built.
Can I suggest before the town starts looking at individually by town, the financial issues that you're talking about, given that the state has passed the statute, I think there's got to be people in the state that are trying to figure this out. And I'd look to the state both for what's the state going to do across the board in this area before you spend your time in that. At least I'd try to find that out first.
Yeah, so we do know that through new state law that we will be required to make zoning amendments to incentivize affordable housing development. So that's going to be unit buildings that have 50, or developments that have 50% plus one unit affordable to the same income levels that are proposed in the inclusionary zoning ordinance. So we know that that is one thing that is required, and we'll have to plan for later this year. As it relates to all the other things, there are so many things that are happening. There is funding availability coming to help in terms of technical assistance and to incentivize the development of affordable housing units. But there isn't necessarily a regional strategy. So I say regional because it is a regional issue, but there isn't necessarily a full state strategy either, which there's very different areas of Maine that one size may not fit all. So we're looking towards, partners in this in terms of addressing it regionally. Unfortunately, zoning also ends at municipal borders. So looking at it while regional partners in the state sort of provide some input on that, needing to address it locally, in addition to looking more regionally as well.
I wanted to add a couple comments. I think I'm not a developer, but some of the local developers who have commented on the proposed ordinance have stated that the incentives are not enough. And it sounds like you're sort of acknowledging that. I know some of the other towns are doing these affordable housing support funds to sort of offset. Don't know if that's an option here. I also want to sort of point out that just looking at regionally and sort of thinking about that a lot of the other towns are creating housing production goals and specific affordable housing production goals. And I don't know if you've seen Cumberland's, but they just came out with 150 affordable housing goals, like in the near term is what they said. And at the same time, they're recommending implementing the affordable aspects of LD 2003. So to me, as you're working on this and we have LD 2003, it seems like there should be some kind of merger or discussions at the same time, and then your other comprehensive strategies that really sort of kind of looking at the big picture. And that's kind of my goal, is to see how is this all going to work and what can we really get done.
Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I personally feel like we haven't gone far enough on the incentives to the developer. If we're expecting developers to do 10% affordable units in any development, I really think that there's not a downside to us having a more rich incentive, if you will. In other words, so the developer may get an additional 2 units versus just 1 additional unit in that development, or why not 3? I don't know what the exact number is, but we would be producing more housing in town. Any kind of housing, I think, is good. And I think the incentives for the inclusionary zoning ordinance can definitely be strengthened in this. So I'd like developers to say, wow, Yarmouth has one of the best incentive programs for doing the inclusionary zoning ordinance of any town around. So that's kind of what I'm striving for.
Yeah, I guess I'm not a developer either, so you should probably ask the developers for what they think. And real quick, I have to go, but to say that there isn't any evidence to show that the housing costs increase with inclusionary zoning is just not true. There's plenty of evidence for that. It might not be true everywhere, but there have been countless studies done. I'm happy to send you a link or two.
That'd be great.
I just don't think it's fair to blanket statement that. Thank you.
If you can send those studies to Aaron, that would be great. I'd appreciate it. We have how much more time?
This was only planned to be about an hour, but we've gotten some great feedback. So I think we'll look to about 10 more minutes.
Yeah, I would like to ask, I really appreciate the enthusiasm, but I also want to make sure that people who haven't had a chance to talk yet are able to ask a question or make a comment. So is there anybody online or in the room that would like to say something to this? Push the button. Don't push the button. That's okay. Oh, it sounds like the mic isn't working now. Yeah.
Listening to Mr. Ashley say your most affordable housing is rehabbing old housing. And thinking in terms of Habitat for Humanity has done great things. I think our approach should be a Habitat for Humanity approach with existing housing that needs rehabilitation. And I think that would get us out of the box.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So the comment was that we should be looking to work with Habitat for Humanity to rehab existing housing units for affordable housing. Not quite. So the town taking the same approach that Habitat for Humanity takes.
Would be having some responsibility for their decreased housing costs.
So that she also added that the tenant would have some responsibility for their decreased housing costs. So I apologize that I got it slightly incorrect off the top, but employing that same approach that Habitat for Humanity uses to create units within communities and looking towards our existing housing stock to do so.
So I am for affordable housing in Maine, and we do need it, but I think the approach of inclusionary zoning needs to be looked at a little bit deeper. Has the town thought about donating land to developers to create housing? Because the land cost is what's so cost prohibitive. And so when you start looking at developers, when you put these strict inclusionary zoning rules in your town, they start seeking other opportunities, and they are going to leave Yarmouth and want to go somewhere else where they can be profitable. So when they're losing money because construction costs are so high, and I'm not a developer, but I see it, they're going to seek opportunities elsewhere rather than your own community. So it would be a great opportunity to look at you exploring, is there land that could be used to develop, you know, X amount of units, whether it be rental or affordable units. But my point earlier is they're really not affordable. And so when you look at a family having to save and, you know, barely qualify for mortgages, and then they have these 99-year resale restrictions, I would never want my child to buy one of those because I would feel like their hands are tied and they would never be building equity, because when HUD usually, it takes them sometimes 7 to 10 years to adjust their rate sheets. They just did it this year and there was an increase, but you know, even if it's yourself as an employee and you buy in, you're never building equity, and you're really not. So those are just things that we want to do the right thing for people, and I feel that sometimes the inclusionary zoning really isn't doing the right thing for the people that we're trying to protect and help.
Yeah, if I could just mention that in terms of town-owned land, I think we are going to look at that closely. In fact, we're looking at the potential for a study. I'm not sure if it's going to be a third-party consultant. We're not, but we are talking about that, really looking closely at not just town-owned land, but all land in Yarmouth and what might be a good location for affordable housing. I think in terms of town-owned land, that wouldn't necessarily, in my opinion, that wouldn't be something that a market rate developer would come in and do an inclusionary zoning development on. Town-owned land would be for 100% affordable. It sounds like that's what you're saying, that if the town was going to donate a parcel of land, that would be 100% affordable units on that land. Right.
I just feel that that would serve more people, and that's
absolutely.
our goal of serving more people. So by putting on these hefty restrictions, you're potentially pushing folks away. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Thank you.
So, as I'm listening to everybody, I feel like everybody's saying yes, we need affordable housing. So everybody that's here today, would be great if you would contact the town council, the planning board, and make sure that they get that there is enough enthusiasm for it, and to support basically a multitude of approaches, including what you just said with land. The 10% is not going to get us to the goal. I think we acknowledge that it's just one piece. But if the people that make the decisions in this town, and if you go back and look at our comprehensive plan since 1995, I think. Three, we've been saying affordable housing. It has not happened. And there's a reluctance on the part of the town council and previously the planning board and the town council to be really outrageous and to go big. So you could help all of us, each one of you, by just saying your piece. And I don't care what approach you think is best. It's going to take all the approaches to get there. But they can't just keep hearing from us. It's like a broken record. And that's not what they want to hear. So that would really help us all. Thank you very much.
I was just about to say thank you for all the work that you're all doing on this issue. I think if ever there were an issue that qualifies for the devil is in the details, this is it. And so I think really what you're hearing is everyone is in favor of affordable housing, but to get our support, we need to know more about the details. That's the tough one. The question I have is, to what extent, under the existing zoning ordinances, does the planning board have the ability to require some of what we want to do with affordable housing? Because I mean, again, even this, I think the date is for January 1, 24. That's going to slip clearly. And all of us, to follow your comment, want something done before that. So to what extent can we work with the existing ordinances to get some of what we want now?
That is a great question, and perhaps one that we should have addressed earlier in this evening. But Lee, thank you for the prompt as a closing point. So to your point, sir, right now, the only place the planning board, unless there is there's no mechanism in the zoning ordinance to require affordable housing units. Currently, the only way that we, the town, can create affordable housing units is through our open space residential design, which is a fancy way to say cluster subdivisions. So putting the houses closer together rather than spread out in a subdivision. There is a density bonus built into that ordinance, which does allow additional units when there are affordable units provided by the developer of such subdivision. It's never been used, or at least it hasn't been used recently. And it perhaps, from my professional opinion, is perhaps that incentive, the number of additional units, bonus units you might get out of it, is not good enough. So it circles back to some of the questions we had tonight about our particular inclusionary zoning ordinance and how to best incentivize the creation of the units, because we do acknowledge and we understand that it is additional requirements on developers, and it's not just for-profit developers, it's also nonprofit developers, but it does add additional requirements, and we acknowledge that, and we acknowledge that that takes a lot of time and money to get through. So looking to ways to encourage them, folks to develop housing within the community in partnership and achieving, the goals of the community. So I hope that answered it.
I would just like to say thank you so much for the committee and for doing this incredible work. We have a huge need for affordable housing everywhere, but really in Yarmouth, we could make a big difference. And I like to think of the inclusionary housing as being one little aspect that can have some affordable housing scattered out through town. But the other two prongs that have been suggested are wonderful, and they could be done with perhaps in a much more straightforward way, with a quick feedback on getting some affordable housing, and people can begin to understand all through the town that, oh, affordable housing is a good thing. Thank you.
If I could add to that and sort of dovetail with what Lee said, we have two great town staff that work with this committee, and we have a 6-person committee, and there are only 4 committee members right now. 2 wonderful members of our committee recently left the committee. So we need your help. And so there are 2 slots available on the Yarmouth Affordable Housing Committee. So tell your friends, tell your neighbors that we're looking for people to volunteer. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'd say most of us have full-time jobs and lots going on. So if people could help us in any way they can, find more committee members, go to the council, show up, go to the planning board, show up. We'd appreciate it. Thanks.
And to add to that, we need a variety of points of view on the committee. If this is going to be successful, a majority of people in town have to be supportive. And it's great to hear all of you here who are supportive of affordable housing. But, affordable housing, no matter how it happens, is going to impact all of us in some ways, in small ways or big. And sometimes people don't want, they're happy to do it as long as nothing changes. And that's not a tenable solution. So we need people from different perspectives who bring perspectives like real estate or others on the committee to help us to do this in a way that's really successful for the whole town.
So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. This was recorded. It's was not broadcast out on television, but it is recorded. So we will have the link on the town's website in the next few days. But we've referenced the planning board. It is anticipated that this topic will be in front of the planning board again on March 8th. So if you're interested, it's the only thing on the agenda, so you don't have to wait to the end of the evening or anything. So if you're interested, please think about joining us either here in the log cabin on the 8th, again, that's March 8th, or join us via GoToMeeting if that is your preference. So we thank you for your time this evening and for your interest in the ordinance. And if there are any specific questions that you have on it, please feel free to either get in touch with myself or with Julie. We'd be happy to walk you through the ordinance. Thank you.
Thanks.